On February 22, 2002, soldiers of the Angolan Armed Forces, assisted by Israeli surveillance experts, caught up with Jonas Savimbi and killed him in the province of Moxico in central eastern Angola. Savimbi's death marked the end of the 27-year-long Angolan civil war, in which at least 500,000 people died in the conflict for the vast diamond and oil-rich southern African country. Jonas Savimbi, who has been described as one of the most charismatic rebels on the continent, had spent more than 35 years in the bush battling first for Angolan independence and then later for personal power. Some senior officials in US President Ronald Reagan's administration touted him as being one of the most talented, charismatic leaders in modern African history. However, some people saw him as a stooge of capitalism and a plaything of the racist apartheid South African government as well as the United States of America. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the life story of Jonas Savimbi, the Angolan rebel leader of UNITA. Jonas Savimbi was born in Munango, Angola, on the 3rd of August 1934 to Helena Mbundu Savimbi and Lotte Savimbi. Jonas Savimbi was a member of the Ovimbundu tribe, an ethnic group that comprises about 1/3 of the nation's population. Savimbi's father, Lotte, was a railway station master and part-time Protestant church worker. The local Catholic missions in the then Portuguese-occupied Angola were often in conflict with Lotte Savimbi because of the effectiveness of his evangelism. It is said that Lotte Savimbi was so effective to such an extent that the Catholic Church repeatedly asked railroad officials to send Lotte to new job postings. As the family moved, young Jonas Savimbi picked up his father's compelling skills as an orator as well as his detailed knowledge about the railroad. This knowledge of the railroad would later serve Jonas Savimbi when, as a guerrilla leader, he organized attacks on the line that was one of Southern Africa's vital commercial links, transporting copper and other ores from Zaire, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. By cutting the railroad, UNITA effectively paralyzed Angola's economy, but more on that later. Young Jonas Savimbi attended Protestant missionary schools where he thrived academically. He showed great determination and intelligence in getting a secondary schooling that was extremely rare for black children at the time. Savimbi then got a scholarship to Lisbon in Portugal to study medicine. During his time in Portugal, Savimbi became involved in politics and, like most Angolan students, he attracted the attention of the Portuguese secret police. The Portuguese secret police even detained Savimbi 3 times. Eventually, Jonas left the country secretly with the aid of the Portuguese Communist Party network and was sheltered by the French Communist Party. Jonas Savimbi fell back on the missionaries for a scholarship that enabled him to resume his studies in Switzerland. However, he made the decision to leave the study of medicine, partly because he considered the freeing of Angolans from Portugal as his country's most important priority. So Jonas Savimbi transferred to the University of Lausanne to study political science and law and graduated with honors in July of 1965. In the early 1960s, Savimbi flirted with the various Angolan independence movements, at one point joining the youth wing of the Marxist Party, the Movement for the Popular Liberation of Angola, the MPLA. However, following encouragement from Kenyan nationalists such as Tom Mboya and Jomo Kenyatta, Savimbi joined the Union of Angolan People, the UPA, in 1961, where he was made the Secretary General. The following year, the UPA and the Angolan Democratic Party formed the National Front for the Liberation of Angola, which is commonly known as the FNLA. In this political movement, Savimbi became the foreign minister of the new organization's Government of the Republic of Angola in exile, before resigning in 1964 over disagreements with founder Holden Roberto's leadership style. Savimbi also accused the leadership of this organization of tribalism and also that they were CIA agents. By 1965, Jonas Savimbi started contemplating on forming his own movement and went to seek support for it. That support came from the People's Republic of China. He and a few other comrades of his went to China's Nanking Military Academy, where they obtained military training, especially in guerrilla tactics. During his stay in China, Savimbi met with Mao Zedong and other military and political leaders of the Chinese Revolution. Many years later, when Savimbi sought help from Western nations, he downplayed his stay in China as well as his relations with the country. He was even quoted saying, "From Mao and the communists, I learned how to fight and win a guerrilla war, but I also learned how not to run an economy or a nation. The wealth of a nation is created by the initiative of individuals." 1966 would then see Savimbi finally form his political unit, UNITA. So UNITA was formed on the 13th of March 1966 inside Angola at the village of Mungai in Moxico province, and this was following a period of intense political mobilization from Jonas Savimbi. The organization then began armed actions against the Portuguese on the ground on 25 December 1966. UNITA became the third major political movement in Angola's independence campaign, besides their rivals, the FNLA and the MPLA. Jonas Savimbi was a charismatic leader who spoke 7 languages and mobilized many people with his oratory power. He claimed that UNITA would be multi-ethnic and committed to Angolan unity and tradition-based consensus decision-making as opposed to the MPLA's centralized top-down leadership style. He and his forces, with bases of operation in the east and south of the country, began raiding important sites like the Benguela Railroad, which was a strategic line for the Portuguese. However, apparently unknown to others in the top UNITA leadership, Savimbi's ambition and calculation for the future had brought him into secret contact with the Portuguese military by the early 1970s. So in this regard, UNITA became more involved in fighting their rival, the MPLA, than pose a serious challenge to the Portuguese soldiers in Angola. Many years later, letters from the Portuguese Secret Police Archive between Savimbi and Portuguese authorities were reviewed in a French magazine in 1974, and they dealt a serious blow to Savimbi's credibility as a nationalist leader. As time progressed, the Portuguese government found itself besieged within Angola and ostracized internationally for its continued hold on the nation. After the Portuguese dictatorship was overthrown in a military coup in 1974, Savimbi emerged from the guerrilla war to conclude a ceasefire with the new Portuguese leaders. So Savimbi also signed an agreement with the 2 other Angolan liberation parties in 1975. These were known as the Alvo Accords, and they granted Angola independence. Savimbi signed these accords along with Agostinho Neto of the MPLA and Holden Roberto of the FNLA. In signing these agreements, there was hope that the 3 groups might come together and lead their fellow citizens in a peaceful transition to independence. This was not to be, however. Angola became independent on November 11, 1975. Nonetheless, the rivalry between the major insurgent factions continued and quickly evolved into Angola's bloody 27-year civil war. So after the disintegration of the Alvo Accords, a quick and bitter power struggle ensued as the MPLA declared itself the new government of Angola. When Savimbi and his UNITA party protested, the MPLA called in Cuban troops and used Soviet-manufactured weapons to maintain power. Soon, Savimbi was on the run and he retreated to his base in Huambo in the Central Highlands. Then, in March of 1976, under the MPLA government attack, Savimbi began the long march to the south, mirroring the Chinese leader Mao Zedong's heroic feat. Despite the assault on UNITA, Savimbi was not so easily beaten. He attracted and conscripted a new army, pointing out to his followers that Angola had only traded domination by the Portuguese for domination by the Soviet Union. This rhetoric, as well as the Soviet support for the MPLA, attracted the attention of the apartheid government in South Africa, where the minority-run white government feared Soviet incursions in Africa. So with the help of South African weapons, soldiers and training, Savimbi was able to organize a powerful and effective guerrilla force. He established his new base at Jamba, near the Namibian border, under the protection of the South African military shield. So the Angolan civil war progressed, and time after time, the Angolan government, with its Cuban reinforcements and Soviet war machinery, tried to annihilate Savimbi's army. But like I said, this was not an easy task. By the mid-1980s, Savimbi's UNITA forces held vast stretches of territory from which they harassed government installations, railroads, and supply lines. In all of this, Savimbi became a tool for the United States and South African interests which wanted to prevent the MPLA from controlling such a wealthy and strategic African country. An agent of the United States CIA by the name of John Stockwell was put in charge of bringing together an opposition to the MPLA that could be funded and supplied out of the United States Embassy in Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC. In his attempts to build up the opposition, John Stockwell was dismayed by the incompetence of UNITA, but given the weakness of the FNLA, which was already being backed by the United States, John Stockwell decided to build up UNITA into the anti-communist alternative to the MPLA. So in 1975, at the behest of Henry Kissinger, around $25 million of military assistance was approved for UNITA. During the war, vast portions of land in the countryside were cut off from agriculture by minefields. Mine victims and malnourished children swamped the hospitals in these areas. Tens of thousands of boys and girls were kidnapped by UNITA troops and marched to UNITA-controlled areas in the south around Savimbi's capital at Jamba. It is reported that UNITA carried out a reign of terror consisting of appalling acts such as the public burning of women said to be witches. Inside UNITA, Savimbi maintained an iron rule by using his obvious charisma and by eliminating any potential leadership contenders. Many of Savimbi's close associates who challenged him were either imprisoned or killed on his orders. As the Angolan Civil War progressed, Savimbi frequently traveled abroad in search of support for his cause, and his efforts in Washington in the United States proved particularly rewarding. His intelligence and charisma made him easy to sell to international audiences as being the democratic leader that Africa needed. With the newly elected United States President Ronald Reagan vowing to roll back communism globally, Savimbi successfully courted increased United States backing for his cause. He visited the United States in 1981 and again in 1986, at which time he was received in the Oval Office by President Reagan himself. There he was accorded VIP treatment by the Reagan administration as he represented UNITA as a movement fighting against communism. However, some influential United States politicians felt uncomfortable supporting Savimbi, noting that the apartheid South African government was supplying UNITA while also occupying the neighboring nation of Namibia. Nevertheless, the administration of Ronald Reagan gave Savimbi more than $15 million in aid, as well as the weapons he needed to counter Soviet aircraft and missiles in Angola. In the Angolan Civil War, the Battle of Cuito Cunavale was a turning point in this long struggle. This battle led to a decline in Savimbi's military position and influence. Meanwhile, the MPLA had fully stamped its authority in the country as being the legitimate government of Angola. So after a period of bitter armed conflict and civil war that had also been heightened by the Cold War struggle, initial efforts at reconciliation began. In June of 1989, at the Badolite Summit, organized by President Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire, Savimbi and José dos Santos, who was now the head of the MPLA and the president of Angola, met for the first time. Eventually, on the 31st of May 1991, the rival leaders signed the Buysees Peace Accord in front of all the key international organizations. September of 1991 would see Jonas Savimbi return to Luanda, the capital of Angola, for his first visit after 16 years of independence. During this period of peace and reconciliation, Jonas Savimbi agreed to take part in elections that were to be supervised by the United Nations, and they were going to be held in September of 1992. But when UNITA lost and Savimbi failed to win the presidency, he returned to the bush to set off the most destructive year of warfare in the whole civil war. This was between October of 1992 and October of 1993. In this phase of the war, the violence spread to areas of the country that previously had been untouched. The MPLA retaliated with indiscriminate killing of UNITA supporters and civilians of the Ovimbundu ethnic group. MPLA supporters living in the UNITA-controlled regions in the Central Highlands fled to the coastal regions, fearing retribution. The UNITA and the MPLA forces also began planting mines in contested rural regions, causing additional civilian casualties. In fact, the Angolan War created 77,000 amputees. When the Cold War ended and the United States withdrew support to Savimbi, he equipped his army primarily with the proceeds from diamond sales until the United Nations barred such trading. Savimbi also bought logistical access through Zambia from his diamond revenues and purchased arms from Ukraine and elsewhere to re-equip his forces. This intense period of fighting was only quelled by the signing of the Lusaka Protocol in 1994, which included a ceasefire and a program for demobilization and disarmament and the deployment of a bigger United Nations peacekeeping mission. On 20 November 1994, Savimbi signed this peace treaty to bring this second phase of the civil war to an end. But in reality, Savimbi never accepted the Lusaka agreement. He pretended to go along with it out of necessity. Only in 1995 did Savimbi agree to meet President José dos Santos, and the National Assembly then created two vice presidencies, one of which was offered to Savimbi. Even so, he continued to hold out, sometimes escalating the Bush War. Eventually, Dos Santos and Savimbi agreed to a unity government and the merging of troops into a national army. He would, however, decline his position in the unity government and decided not to attend the inauguration ceremony. Full-scale fighting resumed in 1998, and as early as January of 1999, Savimbi gave no sign of abandoning his Bush army nor accepting the changes that had taken place in Angola since the 1992 elections. The Angolan Civil War continued into 2001, by which time both the Angolan government and the Southern African Development Community (SADC) had branded Savimbi a war criminal. Only Savimbi's death while fighting government forces in Moxico province on 22 February 2002 finally signaled the collapse of UNITA and the real possibility of establishing a genuine peace in Angola. In this instance, soldiers of the Angolan armed forces, assisted by Israeli surveillance experts, had tracked down Savimbi in this province of Moxico and shot him dead. He was hurriedly buried in a cemetery in the central town of Luena. 17 years later, in 2019, Jonas Savimbi's remains were exhumed in January of that year. This was with the intention to give him a dignified funeral and burial, as well as an attempt to heal the country of Angola. Jonas Savimbi was reburied in May of 2019. Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are on the life and legacy of Jonas Savimbi, the Angolan rebel leader. Don't forget to like and share the video if you enjoyed it. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tatenda for African Biographics. Until next time, cheers. Have a good one.